This story happened just a week ago, and it still feels surreal every time I think about it. It was early in the morning, around 7:30 a.m., and I'd woken up in a daze to take my medication, not yet fully awake, still moving on autopilot. The house was blanketed in that deep morning silence that's almost oppressive, as if every corner, every wall, were holding its breath. My eyes hadn't adjusted to the light as I started making my way through the quiet, barely aware of my surroundings. It was one of those mornings where the silence almost felt too thick, too heavy, making me feel oddly uneasy without knowing why. Suddenly, faint sounds broke through the quiet, coming from the direction of the kitchen. They were subtle, almost hesitant, but somehow they felt wrong. It wasn't the usual sound of my mom or my brother moving around. It was something else. Someone else. At first I dismissed it, thinking it might just be my mom, maybe up early to prepare breakfast as she sometimes did. But these sounds had an unusual rhythm, like someone unfamiliar with our kitchen was moving things around. The clinking of glass jars, the creak of a cabinet door, the soft rustle of plastic wrap. It all felt strange, oddly unfamiliar in a space I knew so well. A curious, creeping unease began to build in my chest. With each step down the hallway, the morning light grew a little brighter, casting a pale glow across the walls. I approached the kitchen, half expecting to see my mom, or maybe even my older brother Benjamin, who sometimes had friends over without warning. But as I peeked around the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. Standing there with his back turned to me was a man I'd never seen before. He was tall, probably in his 40s, wearing dark pants and a black jacket. His hair was slightly messy, as though he'd just woken up himself, and he moved with a strange, almost practiced ease as he rummaged through our fridge. It was as if he'd done this 1,000 times before, his motions casual, confident. The sheer familiarity in his movements made my heart skip a beat. He seemed completely engrossed in his task, pulling out containers, examining them with disinterest, then putting them back as if searching for something specific. Eventually, he pulled out a slice of cold pizza that had been sitting there for a couple of days, holding it with an air of calm nonchalance that was deeply unsettling. For a moment, I thought he might actually be a friend of Benjamin's, someone I just hadn't met yet. Benjamin had a wide circle of friends, some of whom were eccentric and had the tendency to stop by unannounced. But as I watched this man, the eerie familiarity of his movements left me feeling increasingly uneasy. There was something about the way he moved, so casual, so comfortable, that didn't sit right with me. Trying to keep my voice steady, I cleared my throat and spoke up. Are you looking for something in particular?" The words felt awkward, too casual for the situation, but I didn't know what else to say. I felt like I was trying to break some invisible tension that had settled over the room. The man turned around, looking slightly startled. But then he gave me a small, friendly smile that somehow made me feel even more uncomfortable. "Yeah, just looking for some ranch dressing for this pizza," he said, chuckling as if he were laughing at himself. He held up the pizza slice like it was the most natural thing in the world. His response threw me off. The innocence in his tone made me hesitate, even though every instinct was telling me that something was wrong. There was a casualness to his manner, a strange sense of belonging that left me at a loss for words. After a brief pause, I reached for the bottle of ranch on the shelf and handed it to him, too shocked to do much else. Just as he took it from me, my mom came down the stairs. Her face shifted from confusion to alarm in a matter of seconds. She took one look at the man, then at me, her expression tightening with worry and disbelief. Who is this?" she asked, her voice tight and tense, her eyes flicking between me and the man. Trying to keep things calm, I replied, "He's probably a friend of Benjamin's." But before I could say anything else, the man shook his head, looking genuinely surprised by the suggestion. "Oh, no, I'm not," he said in a perfectly calm voice. "I just came in because the door was open." The casual way he said it made my blood run cold. He had simply walked into our house as if that was a perfectly normal thing to do. My mom's face went pale, and I could feel my own heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, no one moved. We just stared at each other, caught in a strange, silent standoff. Finally, my mom took a step back, her voice shaking as she told him he needed to leave. The man didn't resist. He simply nodded, set the pizza slice down on the counter, and walked out without a word, as if this were all part of some unspoken agreement. As soon as he was gone, we locked the door, my mom and I sharing a look of shock and disbelief. It wasn't until we noticed a small, worn bag he had left on the counter that we fully grasped the strangeness of the situation. Inside the bag were several IDs and cards, all with the same name but no photos. Feeling shaken, we called Benjamin to make sure he didn't know the man, and then we contacted the police. Later, the police informed us that the man was homeless and likely under the influence of something, which could explain his bizarre behavior. They assured us that he was harmless, just confused. But the experience left us both deeply unsettled. We had always felt safe in our home, never even thinking to lock the doors in the morning. Now, the memory of that man's calm, familiar demeanor haunts me every time I walk into the kitchen. There's something unsettling about the thought of someone walking in and feeling so at ease, as if they belonged there just as much as we did. When I was around 11 or 12, my family regularly ordered frozen food from Schwann's, a delivery service that brought frozen goods straight to your door in big, refrigerated trucks. The delivery guy was the same each time, and over the weeks, he and my mom got to know each other a bit. They would chat briefly during each delivery, sharing small talk about the weather or how busy his route was that day. I usually sat nearby in the living room, half listening as they talked. From the beginning, though, something about him unsettled me. He was polite and friendly, never saying anything overtly wrong, but there was a certain way he looked at me that made my skin crawl. Each time he came to deliver our order, he would glance over at me, his gaze lingering a bit too long. It wasn't a quick look either. It was a steady, unnerving stare that made me feel exposed. Eventually, I started to hide whenever he arrived, ducking into another room until he was gone. One day, my mom decided that we needed to cut back on expenses, so we stopped ordering from Schwann's. She informed the delivery man the next time he came, thanking him for his service but letting him know we wouldn't be ordering again. He seemed disappointed, even pressing her about whether we were sure. My mom was polite but firm, and he eventually nodded, accepting our decision, or so we thought. Over the next few weeks, he continued to show up, each time asking if we were sure we didn't want to place an order. At first, it seemed harmless enough. Maybe he was just trying to keep a regular customer. But his persistence grew uncomfortable. Each time he came, I would feel that familiar unease, my stomach tightening as I hid out of sight, praying he wouldn't notice me. One afternoon, he arrived again, and when my mom didn't answer the door immediately, he tried to turn the doorknob. The sound of it rattling sent a jolt of fear through me. My mom and I exchanged a panicked look, and she immediately went to the door, calling out to him to leave. He hesitated for a moment, looking almost disappointed before finally backing away. After that incident, my mom contacted Schwann's and reported his behavior. Shortly after, we got a new delivery person, and the unsettling visits stopped. But the experience stayed with me. Months later, I heard from a friend that she had seen a delivery man matching his description, acting rudely at a nearby grocery store. I was relieved to hear he had been let go, but the memory of his intense gaze and the way he'd tried to enter our home still sends chills down my spine. During my college years in Cape Town, South Africa, I worked part-time as a pizza delivery driver. The pay was decent, and it gave me a chance to explore different parts of the city. One particular house stood out in my memory, partly because of how frequently I delivered there, and partly because of how strange each visit felt. The property was large, surrounded by a tall iron gate that was always locked. Each time I arrived, a man would appear on the other side of the gate, and he would insist that I pass the pizza through the bars without ever unlocking it. I found this odd, but he was polite enough, so I didn't think too much of it. and went along with the unusual request. One evening, I received yet another order from that address. By then I knew the routine and prepared to hand the pizza through the bars as usual. But when I arrived, something was different. Instead of the usual man, a woman answered the gate. She looked at me with a calm, almost expressionless face, and then, to my surprise, she unlocked the gate and invited me in. Her calm demeanor caught me off guard. I'd never actually been inside the property before, and the man had always been so insistent on keeping the gate closed. But she seemed friendly, and nothing about the situation felt immediately threatening, so I decided to step inside. I followed her through the gate, and we walked down a dimly lit pathway that led toward the house. The property was larger than it looked from the outside. We passed by a neglected garden, the plants overgrown and tangled as if they hadn't been cared for in years. The faint smell of mildew and something metallic filled the air, making me feel increasingly uneasy with each step. The house itself loomed ahead, looking worn and slightly run down, its paint peeling and windows foggy. She led me through a side door and down a narrow, shadowy hallway. The silence was heavy, broken only by the soft shuffle of her footsteps echoing against the hardwood floors. We eventually entered a dimly lit living room, where the air felt dense and stale. The room was sparsely furnished with an old couch, a dusty coffee table, and, to my surprise, a large vintage dentist's chair in the corner. The chair stood out, looking completely out of place among the modest furniture. It was one of those old reclined chairs with metal armrests and a footrest, like something you'd see in an old horror movie. The leather was cracked and worn, and it had an eerie presence that sent a chill down my spine. But that wasn't the strangest part. In the chair lay a figure, completely still and covered from head to toe with a white sheet. The shape was unmistakably human, but I couldn't tell if it was a mannequin, a person, or something else entirely. My pulse quickened as I tried to make sense of the scene, my mind racing with questions. The woman didn't acknowledge the chair or the figure under the sheet. She just looked at me with that same calm, almost eerie expression, as if there was nothing unusual about any of this. She handed me payment, her eyes never leaving mine, and thanked me in a voice that was soft and controlled, almost too controlled. I mumbled a quick, "Thank you," my skin prickling with an overwhelming urge to leave. I backed out of the room as casually as I could manage, fighting the urge to run as I retraced my steps down the hallway and out the door. Once outside, I felt a rush of relief, but the unsettling feeling lingered. As I climbed back into my car, the strange scene replayed in my mind. The dimly lit room, the silent woman, the dentist's chair, and the mysterious figure covered in a sheet. Everything about it felt deeply wrong, as though I had glimpsed something I wasn't supposed to see. I couldn't shake the feeling, so I decided to call the police and report what I had seen. I described the chair and the figure under the sheet, trying to make sense of the bizarre experience as I explained it to the dispatcher. Later, the police informed me that they had investigated the property. When they arrived, the chair was there, but the figure was gone. They discovered that the man who had originally ordered the pizzas had been reported missing for several years. To this day, I have no idea who the woman was, what was under that sheet, or why she invited me inside. The memory still haunts me, leaving me with an eerie feeling that I may have narrowly escaped something far darker than I'll ever understand. The image of that chair and the figure beneath the sheet is burned into my mind, a constant reminder of how thin the line is between normal life and the mysteries lurking just out of sight. When I was 24, I lived alone in a ground-floor apartment near the bar where I worked. My shifts were long, and I'd often come home around 4 a.m. after closing up. My neighborhood was usually quiet at that hour, with only the occasional night owl or early riser passing by. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows across the sidewalks, but I'd always felt safe, enjoying the stillness of the early morning. One night, after an especially exhausting shift, I decided to order some takeout. I chose the contactless delivery option, hoping to grab my food from the door without any interaction so I could head straight to bed. Around 4:30 a.m., I received a notification saying my order had been delivered, so I glanced out the window to check if the driver had left. To my surprise, he was still there, standing close to my door and looking down at his phone, seemingly typing a message. Moments later, my phone buzzed. It was a message from him. "Hi, your food's here. Could you come out and pick it up?" I hesitated, finding it strange. I'd specifically requested contactless delivery to avoid any interaction, especially so late at night. I replied politely, saying I'd be out in a moment, hoping he'd take the hint and leave in the meantime. But he sent another message almost immediately, insisting, "I'd really appreciate it if you came out." The tone felt off. A sense of unease began creeping up my spine. I looked out the window again, and this time, my heart nearly stopped. Standing a few meters away from the driver was another man, partially obscured in the shadows, his gaze fixed intently on my front door. His stance was stiff, his expression unreadable in the dim light, but his presence was undeniably unsettling. He was waiting, watching, his body tense and poised as if ready to spring into action. The sight of the two men, one by the door and the other lurking in the shadows, filled me with a wave of dread. I quickly sent another message to the driver, reminding him about the contactless delivery option and saying I wasn't comfortable coming outside. My fingers shook as I typed, adrenaline beginning to surge through my veins. For a few agonizing seconds, there was only silence, and I watched through the window as the driver glanced over at the man in the shadows, nodding slightly. Without replying, he finally turned and walked away, the other man following closely behind. I didn't move until I was certain they were both gone. My mind raced with questions. Who was the second man, and why had he been waiting outside my door? What did they want? The experience left me shaken, and even though I reported the incident to the delivery app, I never received a response. For weeks afterward, the image of those two men haunted me. I felt uneasy every time I came home late at night, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my sense of safety had been shattered. That brief encounter left a permanent mark on me, a constant reminder of how vulnerable we are when we least expect it. To this day, I still wonder what their intentions were and what might have happened if I'd opened the door that night.